The Great War, a conflict that engulfed the world in unprecedented violence and destruction. Millions perished, empires fell, and the modern world was forever reshaped. But as we look back over a century later, a profound question remains. Was World War I necessary? Europe in the early 20th century was a tangled web of alliances treaties made in the name of mutual defense. France, Russia, and Britain faced off against the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Each nation was bound to come to the other's defense, like a house of cards waiting to collapse. These alliances weren't inevitable pathways to war. Diplomatic solutions were possible, but the governments of Europe were driven by fear and mistrust. Leaders felt that war was the only way to settle disputes, but this was not the only option. Alliances, which were meant to prevent war, ironically acted as tripwires that escalated a local conflict into a global catastrophe. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in 1914 by a Serbian nationalist is often seen as the event that triggered World War I. But was this incident enough to justify a global conflict that would lead to over 16 million deaths? Historically, the death of a royal figure in such circumstances might lead to diplomatic tensions, but it didn't have to result in war. Austria-Hungary's aggressive demands on Serbia, backed by Germany's blank check assurance of support, escalated the situation. Diplomacy and mediation, which had successfully resolved similar crises before, were abandoned in favor of militaristic solutions. Nationalism and imperialism also played a significant role. The great powers of Europe were in a race for dominance over colonies, trade routes, and military might. National pride and imperial ambition fed into a mentality that viewed war as an acceptable means of advancing national interests. War wasn't inevitable, but it became more likely because of these competing ambitions. European leaders could have prioritized diplomacy or regional power sharing, but instead they acted with hubris, believing that a war could be quick and decisive, with their nation emerging victorious. That was a tragic miscalculation. Before war broke out in July 1914, there were multiple opportunities to de-escalate the crisis. Austria-Hungary could have pursued a diplomatic resolution with Serbia. Germany, France, and Russia could have worked towards peace rather than mobilizing their armies. Britain could have used its influence to mediate between the great powers. Why didn't they? Miscalculations, poor communication, and an overconfidence in military strategies doomed the chances for peace. Leaders on all sides underestimated the scale and horror that a world war would bring. The will to avoid war was there in some quarters, but it was drowned out by militarists and hawkish political advisors. As tensions mounted, many European populations were swept up in a wave of patriotism. Propaganda depicted war as noble, heroic, and inevitable. The press glorified military action, and few imagined the horrors that lay ahead: trench warfare, chemical attacks, and mass casualties. This fevered public opinion pressured governments to act, but again, it didn't have to be this way. European leaders had the ability to steer public opinion toward peaceful resolutions. In the end, they chose not to, blinded by their belief that war was unavoidable or even desirable for their national interests. Now, let's ask the big question: could World War I have been avoided? Many historians believe the answer is yes. Had Europe's leaders taken a different path, had they chosen diplomacy over war, negotiations over aggression, the world might have been spared one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. World War I wasn't inevitable, it was the product of poor decisions made by people who underestimated the devastation modern war would bring. What can we learn from World War I? That nationalism, militarism, and complex alliances can lead to disaster if not handled carefully. The war wasn't necessary, but once it began, it became a force of its own, dragging the world into a nightmare. The lessons of World War I remind us of the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and humility. It's crucial that we remember how avoidable the Great War was, and how important it is to avoid repeating the same mistakes in our own time. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history.